The sky above Harlow Creek, Wyoming was on fire. Not the polite kind of fire that people back east painted on parlor walls soft pinks and lavender purples arranged just so. Nothing to frighten the sensibilities of the ladies of the house. No. This was the kind of fire that made a person feel small. The kind that cracked across the horizon in deep, furious golds and crimsons, so vivid they almost hurt to look at, bleeding down into the sage flats, until the whole world seemed to be burning from the inside out. Elara Voss had her brush moving before the colors peaked. She worked fast because she had learned, in 2 years of painting this particular ridge above, the Harlow Creek Valley, that the best light lasted exactly 11 minutes. She had timed it. 11 minutes from the moment the sun kissed the rim of the Bighorn Range to the moment the color drained out of the sky and left something quieter behind. 11 minutes to catch. Something that would never be exactly this way again. Not this combination of clouds, not this particular slant of October wind, not this quality of air that smelled of coming snow and dry grass, and the faint sweetness of cottonwood leaves going copper along the creek below. She was not going to waste a single second of it. "Hold still," she muttered to no one in particular. It was a habit she had developed, talking to the light as if it were a living thing, as if it might cooperate if she asked it nicely enough. It never did. It moved at its own pace and cared nothing for what she needed from it. That was half the reason she kept coming back. The other half was harder to name. Elara was 31 years old, and she had been painting this ridge alone for 2 years, 3 months. And she did not keep precise count, but her memory was the kind that held certain things against her will. 11 days. She had come to Harlow Creek the way women in her situation often came to frontier towns in the year 1879, quietly, with a single trunk and a story. She did not volunteer, and an arrangement made through a letter that had cost her the last of her dignity to write. She taught painting to the daughters of the town's better families. 3 afternoons a week, she sat in the parlor of Mrs. Aldridge's house and showed girls between the ages of 8, 16, how to hold a brush, how to see shadow, how to make flat things look round. It was not what she had imagined for herself when she had been one of those girls sitting in a Philadelphia parlor with her own brushes and the particular dangerous ambition of a young woman who believed the world was bigger than the walls around her. But it paid for her room at the Denton boarding house. It paid for her paints and her canvases. And it left her mornings free. Every morning she painted. Every evening she came to this ridge and painted again. The light was different morning and evening, entirely different subjects, she always explained to her students when they asked why she went twice. Morning light was honest. It showed everything. Clearly, without flattery, without mercy. Evening light was something else, something that forgave. She had been told once that she was too severe for a woman. She had been told she painted too hard, thought too much, refused too often, and expected things that were not reasonable to expect. She had been told a great many things by people who did not understand that some people come into the world already knowing what they are, the way a hawk knows what it is, the first time it opens its wings not with arrogance, but with the particular calm of a creature that has no interest in being anything other than itself. The man who had told her she was too severe had been her husband. He was in Philadelphia still. She was here. She was not unhappy about that arrangement. Most days. The brush moved. The colors shifted. Elara leaned back, tilted her head, added a line of deep umber along the ridge's shadow edge, and felt the particular satisfaction that came in those moments when the painting stopped fighting her and started breathing on its own. That was when she heard the horse. She did not look up immediately. Riders passed through the valley below occasionally. Cattlemen moving stock, a freight wagon on its way to Casper, the occasional lone figure, crossing country too empty for most people's comfort. They did not, as a rule, come up the ridge. There was nothing up the ridge except her easel and her 11 minutes of light, and she had always assumed that was enough to discourage company. The horse kept coming. The sound of hooves on the rocky slope was unhurried, deliberate. Whoever it was, they were. Not in a rush, and they were not turning around. Elara kept painting. She had 3 minutes of good light left, and she was not going to surrender them to curiosity. The horse stopped about 20 feet behind her. She could hear it breathing, a big animal, deep-chested, blowing softly after the climb. Neither she nor the rider spoke. She finished the stroke she was working on, added one more, just a touch of raw sienna, along the lower clouds where the light was going amber. Then she straightened, exhaled, and set her brush across the top of her palette. "You picked an inconvenient moment to sightsee," she said, still not turning around. A beat of silence. Then a voice, low, unhurried, with the particular flatness of a man who had spent more years talking to cattle than to people. "Didn't figure on an audience up here myself." She turned. He was still on the horse, a rangy buckskin that stood like it had been carved from the ridge. Itself, one hip cocked, entirely unbothered by the climb. The man was perhaps 35. Weathered the way Wyoming weathered everyone eventually, like wood left outside through two. Many winters stripped down to the essential grain. He had the kind of face that took light well. Strong-boned, honest, with eyes the precise gray blue of the sky at the top of the day before the color came. His hat was pulled low against the last of the sun. He was looking at her painting, not at her, at the painting. Something about that, of all things, made her look at him a second time. "It's a start," she said. A ghost of something moved across his mouth. "Looks finished to me." "It isn't." "All right." He did not argue it. He looked back at the valley below, then at the sky, then at the canvas. Again, the way a man looks at something he is trying to understand, rather than something he is trying to impress anyone by looking at. "You do this every evening?" "Most evenings. I've ridden through this valley 100 times. He studied the horizon, never looked at it like that. "Like what?" "Like it was worth stopping for." Elara looked at him for a long moment. The last of the light was going, turning everything on the ridge a soft, brief gold, before it surrendered to blue. In that light, he looked like something she might have painted, not because he was handsome, exactly, though he was, in the way that land is handsome, completely without vanity about it. "What brings you up here?" she asked. "Lost a heifer 2 days ago. Following sign." He nodded west, toward the broken country above. "The creek. Trail went cold about a mile back. Figured I'd get my bearings from the high ground. Before dark." "Your heifer went toward Tolliver's Flat," Elara said. "I saw her this morning, brown with a split ear." He looked at her with an expression that was not quite surprise, but was the close cousin of it. "You sure?" "I paint what I see. I saw her." She turned back to her canvas. "Tolliver's Flat, north end, near the willow break." A pause. "I'm obliged," he said. He didn't move immediately. She could still feel him behind her, not uncomfortably, just present, the way a well-placed piece of furniture is present, the way a good fire is present. Something solid that changes the temperature of a room. "You always paint alone?" he asked. "Always," she said. Another pause. "That seem lonely to you?" Elara considered the question with more seriousness than he probably expected. She looked at the canvas, at the ridge, the sky, the burning last color of a day that had already passed into memory. "No," she said finally. "It seems honest." She heard him shift in the saddle. Then, "Name's Cade Merritt. I run the M-Bar-R, 6 miles north." She did not turn around. "Elara Voss. I teach painting to children 3 days a week, and I don't. Requires saving, company, or advice." She heard what might have been a quiet laugh, short, genuine, quickly reined in. "Noted," he said. And then she heard the hooves moving away, back down the ridge, steady and unhurried, until the sound faded into the creek noise below, and she was alone again. The way she had been alone for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. She looked at the canvas. picked up her brush, added the one small line she had been holding, back a stroke of pure white light along the very edge of the darkening ridge. It was, she decided, better than it had been 10 minutes ago. She was not sure exactly what had changed. Harlow Creek was not the kind of town that appeared on maps made by people who had never been to Wyoming. It had a population of perhaps 300 souls in good years, a number that included the families on the surrounding ranches, which stretched out across the Bighorn Basin in various states of prosperity and stubbornness. There was a general store run by a man named Hedges, who overcharged without apology and extended credit without being asked, which meant everyone in town both resented him and needed him in roughly equal measure. There was a church, a saloon, a doctor whose hand shook in a way that inspired more prayer than confidence, and a schoolhouse that doubled as a meeting hall on the occasions when the town needed to argue publicly about something. There was also Mrs. Denton's boarding house, which was where Elara lived. Adelaide Denton was 62, built like a woman who had survived 3 husbands and 2 hard winters without losing her sense of humor about any of it, and she had taken one look at Elara when she arrived. The single trunk, the careful posture, the eyes that gave away nothing, and said, "Top room on the east side has the best morning light. I'll have Henry bring your trunk up." She had never asked about Philadelphia. She had never asked about the name that appeared on the letter of arrangement, which was not Voss. Voss was Elara's mother's name, taken back quietly and completely in the months before she left. She asked instead whether Elara preferred coffee or tea in the mornings, whether she minded the sound of the creek at night, and whether she had strong feelings about cats because there were 2 of them and they had opinions about the sleeping arrangements. Elara had said, "Coffee? No, and none that couldn't be negotiated." Adelaide had smiled and showed her to the east room. The arrangement had worked because Adelaide was a woman who understood that some people needed space, the way plants needed light, not as a luxury but as a condition for survival, and she provided it without commentary. In return, Elara was quiet, reliable, paid her rent on the first of each month without reminder, and occasionally helped with the kitchen when Adelaide's bad knee made standing difficult. It was, by the standards of Elara's last 4 years, an extraordinarily good arrangement. She did not think about Philadelphia often. That was not entirely true. She thought about it the way you think about a room you have sealed off, aware of it, occasionally pressing your ear to the door to make sure nothing has escaped, but not opening it. There were things in that room she had no use for anymore. The house on Spruce Street, with its 3 floors and its correct furniture. The dinner parties, where she had sat at the foot of the table and poured tea and smiled at exactly the right moments and felt, with increasing certainty, that she was disappearing. The husband who had not been cruel, she would say that for him, always, it was the thing she gave him freely, but who had looked at her painting the way people look at a child's drawing, with patient, distant, fundamentally unserious approval. She had left in the winter of 1877. Not in the night, not in a panic. She had written the letter. First, set it on the desk where he would find it with his morning correspondence, packed her trunk with the careful thoroughness of a woman who knew she would not be coming back, and taken the early train west. She had stopped in Cincinnati, then St. Louis, then Kansas City. At each stop, she had looked out the window at the country widening around her and felt something loosen in her chest, some long-held grip releasing, and she had stayed on the train. She got off in Cheyenne because she ran out of money, got a room, sold 2 paintings to a kind hotel lobby landscape she had done on the train, quick and urgent, the first honest work she had done, had made in years, and then wrote the letter to Mrs. Aldridge's cousin in Harlow Creek, who had been mentioned once at a Kansas City dinner party as someone who knew, someone who needed someone. The letter had cost her the last of her pride because it required her to ask for something. She had never learned to do that without it feeling like blood. But Mrs. Aldridge had written back promptly. The arrangement had been made, and 3 months later, Elara was standing on the ridge above Harlow Creek, watching the light go wild over the bighorns and feeling, for the first time in longer than she could honestly remember, like herself. She taught well. She was honest with her students about what they could and could not do yet, which the girls initially found alarming and eventually found most of them clarifying. She was not warm in the way that people expected women who worked with children to be warm. She did not coo over their early efforts or tell them everything was wonderful when it wasn't, but she looked at each child's work with genuine attention, the full weight of her eyes, and that, the real looking, was something the girls felt, even if they couldn't name it. Several of them improved more than anyone had expected. Mrs. Aldridge told Adelaide Denton that Miss Voss was peculiar but effective, which Adelaide repeated to Elara with evident satisfaction, as if it were a compliment of the highest order. Elara suspected it was. She had not in 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days given serious thought to any man in Harlow Creek. There were several who had given thought to her. She had noted them, assessed them with the same honest eye she applied to everything, and found none of them interesting enough to investigate further. This was not snobbery, or not only snobbery, it was more that she had learned expensively the difference between wanting a person and wanting the idea of not being alone. She was not interested in making that mistake again. She had found a way to be alone that didn't feel like a wound, and she was not in a rush to risk it. She thought about this the morning after the man on the buckskin came to her ridge. She stood at her east window with her coffee, watching the light come up over the valley, and she thought about the way he had looked at her painting. Not at her, at the painting. Then she thought about her heifer comment, and the way he hadn't laughed at it, the way men laughed at women who surprised them, that quick, defensive sound that was really just the noise of a man recalibrating his expectations downward. He had just said, "You sure?" As if her sureness were the relevant question. It probably meant nothing. She drank her coffee and went to paint. Cade Merritt had come to Wyoming the way a lot of men came to Wyoming in the 1870s, looking for room. He was not running from anything specific, which made him unusual. He had grown up in Missouri, worked cattle in Kansas for 4 years, worked cattle in Nebraska for 2 more, and somewhere along the Platte River in the autumn of 1873, he had looked out at the faith country ahead and thought, there, whatever that means, just there. He'd bought the M-Bar R from a man who was selling due to grief, a wife lost to fever, 3 young children, to get back to his sister in Ohio, and paid what the man asked without negotiation, because negotiating with grief felt like a wrong he was not willing to do. It had cost him everything he'd saved, left him with a ranch that needed 3 years of hard work before it would turn a profit, and given him the precise life he had apparently been looking for without knowing it. He ran 200 head of Hereford cross cattle on 6 miles of creek-bottom grass and high country range. He employed 2 permanent hands brothers named Dix and Warren Hobbs, who had worked for him since the beginning and communicated primarily in short sentences and slight variations in expression, and hired seasonal help for branding and roundup. The ranch made money in a quiet, steady way that did not make him rich, but made him stable, which Cade valued more than richness and always had. He had been married once, briefly, before Wyoming. She was a good woman in Topeka who had understood fairly quickly that his heart was already spoken for by something he couldn't explain and she couldn't compete with, and they had parted without bitterness and with the particular mutual relief of 2 people who have the sense to recognize an honest mistake before it calcifies into something worse. He did not think about it often. He thought about the woman on the ridge with some regularity after that evening. Specifically, he thought about the way she had said, "It seems honest," like that was the highest value she could imagine. Like honesty and solitude were the same word. He found his heifer exactly where she'd said, north end of Tolliver's Flat, near the willow break. He stood there, looking at the animal for a moment, then looked north, toward the ridge, though. It was midday, and she would not be there now. He rode home. He did not ride up the ridge for 2 weeks. The second time he came to the ridge, she was working on a morning painting she had carried. Up to finish in the evening light, which was a thing she did occasionally when a piece refused to resolve itself in the conditions that had made it. She heard the buckskin before she saw him, recognized the particular sound of those hooves. She had not realized she had cataloged it until she heard it again, and her brush hand steadied instead of tensing, which was information she chose not to examine. He came up the slope at the same unhurried pace as before, and stopped at approximately the same distance. She kept painting. "Your heifer was where you said," he offered. "I know." A pause. "You paint that one before?" "I started it this morning. The light was wrong." "What was wrong with it?" She glanced back at him, briefly. He was on the buckskin again, hat pushed back slightly this time, looking at the canvas with that same genuine attention that had bothered her the first time, in a way she still hadn't fully accounted for. "The morning light was flat," she said. "No texture. I needed the evening angle to make the shadow work." He considered this. "So you paint the same thing twice?" "I paint the same subject twice. It's never the same thing." He looked at the valley below them, then back at the canvas. "What's the difference?" She set down her brush and turned fully to face him, because this was the kind of question that deserved a full answer or none at all. "The difference," she said, "is that the subject is out there." She gestured at the valley, the creek, the far ridge going purple in the falling light. "And the painting is in here," she tapped her temple with one paint-stained finger. "They're related, but they're not the same thing. What I painted this morning was what I saw this morning. What I'm painting now is what I understand about what I saw. Those are different." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a more complicated answer than I expected." Most honest answers are. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the precondition for one. He dismounted. In a single easy movement that spoke of 35 years lived primarily in the saddle, and led the buckskin a few steps closer, stopping at a respectful distance from the easel. "May I?" he asked, nodding at the painting. She stepped aside. He looked at it for a long time, not the way most people looked at paintings, the brief, polite glance followed by a generic compliment. He looked the way she looked at country she was about to paint, slowly, from different angles, genuinely trying to understand the thing in front of him. "The shadow here," he said finally, pointing without touching. "It's longer than it actually is." "Yes." "Why?" "Because the actual shadow is accurate, but it doesn't feel accurate. The valley is deeper than it. Looks in flat light. The lengthened shadow makes the depth honest." He nodded slowly, as if this resolved something. "So, you change it to make it more true?" "When I have to." He looked at her, then really looked, the way he'd been looking at the painting, and she held it without dropping her eyes, because she had not survived the last 4 years by looking away from things. "Cade Merritt," he said, "M-bar-R, 6 miles north." "I remember." "Elara Voss." He said her name the way you repeat something you want to remember correctly. "I remember that too," she said, and turned back to her canvas. He didn't leave, but he didn't speak again either, just stood at a comfortable remove while she worked, the buckskin nosing at a scrubby patch of grass at the ridge's edge. After a few minutes, the silence stopped feeling like an imposition and started feeling like a choice they had both made. When she finished the last stroke and stepped back, the light was nearly gone. She began cleaning her brushes without ceremony. "Same time?" he asked. She looked at him. "Tomorrow," he said. not with the eagerness that men often performed when they wanted something. Just as a question, just checking. "I'm here most evenings," she said, weather permitting. He nodded, mounted up, and rode down the ridge at the same easy pace he'd arrived. He came back the next evening, and the one after. By the end of the second week, it had become a thing not arranged exactly, not agreed upon in any formal way, just settled into the way routines settle when no one objects to them. He would arrive as the light was changing, and he would watch her work or look at the valley or occasionally ask questions, careful, genuinely curious questions that she found herself answering more fully than she intended. She would finish the session's painting, and they would stand for a few minutes in the last of the light before he rode back down. He never stayed after dark. He never positioned himself too close to her easel. He never offered opinions unless she seemed to be inviting them. And she noticed, she cataloged, she was honest with herself about noticing a good eye. Not trained, not the eye of someone who had spent time around art, but the eye of someone who had spent 35 years paying close attention to the physical world. He noticed what was true and what wasn't. "You were a rancher before you knew what you were," she told him one evening, the kind of thing that comes out when you've been in someone's company long enough to stop editing yourself. "How do you mean?" "You look at land the way I look at light. Like it's something you can know if you look long enough." He was quiet for a moment. "Land either makes sense or it doesn't. The water, the grass, where the wind breaks. You learn to read it. That's what painting is," she said. "Reading things." He looked at her with an expression she was learning to recognize that particular stillness. That meant he was taking something seriously. "I never thought about it that way," he said. "Most people don't." She said it without sharpness. He received it without offense. That, she thought, the easy way. They gave and took things without either of them having to cushion it was more unusual than she wanted to admit. She did not say this out loud. She did not need to. By the end of October, Elara had painted the ridge from 17 different angles, and Cade had developed the habit of telling Dix and Warren that he had fence to check in the evenings, which they did not believe, but respected sufficiently to not question. The first snow came on a Wednesday, light and early, more a reminder than a commitment. Elara was at the ridge anyway, working quickly in her heavy coat, her breath making small clouds above the palette. She heard the buckskin and did not look up. "You paint in the snow," he said. "The light does something different when there's snow." She added a thin wash of cold blue to you. "The foreground. The ground reflects. The sky comes down." He dismounted and stood beside her closer than usual, she noticed, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the bite of the cold. He looked at the painting. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "Not the generic word, the word with weight," said the way you say something that is true, and that you know the person hearing it needs to hear, said plainly. Elara's brush stopped. Just for a moment. Then she finished the stroke she'd been holding. "Yes," she said. "It is." She was not sure, afterward, whether she meant the painting, or the evening, or the fact of him. Standing there beside her in the cold, both of them looking at the same sky. Perhaps all three. Perhaps that was the point. The town noticed, of course. Towns like Harlow Creek always noticed. It was not malicious, or not primarily malicious. It was simply that there were 300 people living in close proximity with limited entertainment, and a solitary female painting teacher, and a solitary rancher who had been solitary for a demonstrably long time, beginning to appear in each other's company on a regular basis, was the kind of development that generated interest. Adelaide Denton said nothing to Elara directly. She simply began leaving the lamp on longer in the evenings and making sure there was supper kept warm when Elara came back from the Tang Ridge later than usual. This was Adelaide's particular dialect of approval, and Elara understood it. As such, Mrs. Aldridge was less subtle. She mentioned, at the Thursday painting lesson, that Cade Merritt was a man of good character and sound finances, and that his first wife's departure, Elara had not known about this, and her expression must have said so, had been entirely mutual and without scandal, and that he had not, to Mrs. Aldridge's knowledge, looked seriously at anyone since he arrived in the valley. Elara thanked her for the information in a tone that closed the subject. She thought about it for 3 days. The first wife was a small stone. She turned over carefully, examining all sides, not because it troubled her. She was hardly in a position to object to someone's marital history, but because it told her something. A man who had made an honest mistake and been honest about, who had not turned it into bitterness, who had simply moved forward and built his life. She respected that. She understood it. The complication arrived not from outside, but from inside, the way the real complications always did. She had been painting a portrait. It had started as a study. She did figure studies occasionally, part of keeping her eye trained. And she had begun with memory, the angle of a man's shoulders in a saddle, the way a certain quality of light caught the line of a jaw. She had told herself it was simply a compositional exercise. She was composing. She was studying. She was doing what she did. After 4 sessions, she admitted to herself that she was painting Cade Merritt. She set the study face down against the studio wall and did not look at it for a week. The problem, and she was honest enough to call it a problem, because it was one, was that she had come to Harlow Creek specifically to avoid this kind of entanglement. Not men, specifically. The narrowing, the way a woman's life contracted around another person until it fit. The shape of their expectations instead of her own, and the woman inside it stopped being visible even to herself. She had left Philadelphia so that she could be Elara Voss, painter, complete and entire, not half, of someone else's idea of a life. She stood in front of the east window with her morning coffee and argued with herself about it. The argument went on for approximately 10 minutes before she acknowledged that it was not really an argument, that the real question was whether Cade Merritt was the kind of man who narrowed things or the kind who didn't, and she had by this point enough evidence to form a opinion. He had never told her how to paint. He had never suggested her hours were unreasonable or her dedication excessive or her solitude something to be fixed. He had never looked at her canvases with that particular indulgent pity that well-meaning men could not seem to help, bestowing on women who did things seriously. He had asked questions. He had looked. He had been present without demanding anything of her presence. These were not small things. They were, in fact, the things she had never had. The thing that actually stopped her, that made her set down her coffee and look at herself in. The small mirror above the washstand, with something approaching seriousness, was the evening he didn't come. It was a Thursday in early November, clear and cold, the last good sunset of a week that had been mostly overcast. She set up her easel at the usual time and painted the usual ridge and waited for the sound of the buckskin on the slope. It didn't come. She finished the session, packed her supplies, walked down the ridge alone and back along the creek road in the gathering dark. She did not sleep well. In the morning, she told herself she was being absurd. She went to Mrs. Aldridge's house for Thursday lessons and taught 3 girls how to mix colors without making mud. And on her way back, she walked past the Hedges store instead of the direct route home, which added 4 minutes to the walk and brought her past the point where the North Road came into town. She was not waiting for anything. She was taking a different route. People took different routes. Cade rode in on the North Road at approximately 2 in the afternoon, his coat dusty and his jaw set in a way that said the morning had been difficult. He saw her before she saw him. She knew this, because when she looked up, he was already looking, with an expression that shifted. When their eyes met into something that was not quite relief, but was in the same family. Had a calf down in the north pasture, he said, reining up. Spent the night with it. Is it all right? The question came out before she could decide whether to ask it. "It'll do." He looked at her for a moment with an attention she was by now familiar with, the same quality he gave to the valley, to the paintings, to things he was genuinely trying to understand. "I should have sent word." "You didn't owe me word," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I would have wanted it if the situation was reversed." She had no answer for that. She looked at the road between them. "Tomorrow evening?" he asked. "Weather permitting," she said. He nodded, touched the brim of his hat, and rode on toward the livery. Elara walked home at a pace that was not hurrying, because she did not hurry. She went up to her east room, sat in the chair by the window, and stayed there for a long time without doing anything in particular. Then she went to the studio wall, took the face-down canvas, turned it over, and looked at the portrait she had painted. It was good work. She was honest enough to see that. She had caught something in the stance, the set of the shoulders, the particular quality of stillness he carried, not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of a person who has found their ground and stands on it without needing to explain themselves about it. She looked at the painting for a long time. Then she picked up her brush. If you have ever known what it feels like to find the one person who looks at you the way this man looked at that painting, without agenda, without performance, just seeing, then you already understand exactly where this story is going, and you need to stay with it. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because this is the kind of story we tell here. Slow, honest, and worth every minute. Now let's keep going. The portrait was finished in December, 2 weeks before Christmas. She had not told him about it. She told herself this was because it was not finished, and then because the light had been difficult, and then because she was simply waiting for the right moment. And she was honest enough, eventually, to recognize this for what it was. She was afraid, not of him, of what the painting meant, of what it said about her, plainly and without negotiation, the way honest paintings always said things about the people who made them. She showed it to Adelaide first. Adelaide looked at it for a long time, without speaking, which was itself unusual, since Adelaide's natural state was a steady, comfortable stream of words. Then she said, quietly, "Elara, this is the best thing you've painted since you came here." "I know. You know what it says." "I know what it says." Adelaide looked at her with the particular expression she reserved for situations that required no further words, poured them both a cup of coffee, and left Elara alone with the painting. She brought it to the ridge the following Thursday evening, carrying it carefully under one arm, alongside her current work in progress, arriving early enough to lean it against the easel before she began the session. When Cade came up the slope and dismounted and walked over to look at what she was working on, he stopped. He looked at the portrait for a long time. She kept painting. Her brush moved steadily, though her attention was split, tracking his stillness, at the periphery of her vision. "This is me," he said. "Yes, you painted this from memory." "Yes." A pause. "When?" "Over the past few weeks." He looked at it for another long moment. Then he looked at her, not the painting, her, and the expression on his face was the kind that happens when something a person has been carefully not thinking about becomes impossible to continue not thinking about. "Why?" he asked. She set down her brush, turned to face him. "Because," she said, "you were there. Every evening you were there, and I paint what is there. I paint what is true." She held his gaze. "And you have been very true, Cade Merritt, for quite a base. A long time now." The wind moved through the sage below them. Somewhere along the creek, a cottonwood let go of its last leaves in a brief, golden fall. He crossed the distance between them, not fast, not impulsive, the same deliberate way he did everything, and stopped close enough that she had to look up to keep his eyes. "I don't want to make your life smaller," he said. The words came out plain, as if he had been holding them for a while. I watched what you have here, the ridge, the painting, the way you live. I wouldn't take that from you. I wouldn't try. I know, she said. You know, I've been watching you for 3 months. I know what you are. She picked up the portrait, carefully by its edges, and held it out to him. This is yours. I painted it for you. He took it with both hands, the way you take something you understand to be precious, looked at it once more, then looked at her. Elara, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like something he'd known how to say for a long time. Just hadn't had the occasion. Don't make a speech, she said. I don't need a speech. Something broke open in his face, that warmth she had been watching build behind the calm of him for 3 months, finally allowed to be visible. No, he agreed. You don't. He kissed her, there on the ridge, in the last of the December light with the bighorns going blue, and cold around them, and her unfinished painting standing on the easel behind her, and she kissed him back without hesitation. Without the particular guarded quality she brought to most, things opened into it the way she opened into a good painting session, completely and without reservation. Because this was true, and she had always trusted what was true. When they broke apart, the sky had gone deep, that profound cobalt that comes just after the last color leaves. I need to finish that painting, she said, nodding at the easel. He laughed a real laugh, unheld, the first time she had heard it fully, and it was a good sound, warm and unself-conscious, the kind of laugh that belonged to a person who did not perform. Then finish it, he said. She picked up her brush. He stood beside her in the cold and held the portrait carefully in both hands and watched her work. The stars came out above the bighorns, one at a time, the way they always did, not all at once, but gradually, as if they needed to be sure of the darkness before they committed. She painted until she couldn't see the canvas anymore. Then she packed up her supplies, and they walked down the ridge together for the first time. I need you to do something right now before we go any further. Hit that subscribe button. I know. You might be thinking, you'll do it later, but later you'll be somewhere else, watching something else, and you will miss what happens next in this story. And what happens next is the part that changes everything. Don't let that happen. Subscribe now, and let's keep going. The letter arrived in January. Elara saw it on the hall table when she came in from her morning painting session, her name, in handwriting she had not seen in 2 years, but recognized the way you recognize something you have been avoiding. The return address was Philadelphia, not the house on Spruce Street, a lawyer's office. She took the letter upstairs to her east room and opened it standing at the window. It was from her husband's lawyer, which meant it was from her husband, which meant it required a response to something she had believed was finished. The contents were not, at their legal core, complicated. Her husband, she still thought of him as that, had not found a better word, was requesting documentation of her location and current circumstances, preparatory to filing for divorce through the courts. It was a formality. He had the grounds. She had, in fact, deserted the marital home. This was unarguable. But the letter also said in the careful legal language that meant someone had paid to have. The message carried without fingerprints that the divorce, once filed, would be public record. That her name, her location, and her circumstances would be part of the Philadelphia court documents. That people who knew her there, her family, the Spruce Street social circle, anyone who chose to look would know where she was. She stood at the window for a long time. The thing that she felt was not, she realized with some clarity, fear of the divorce itself. She had wanted it and had not known how to initiate it from this distance. And the fact that he was doing it was, in the practical sense, a relief. She would be free, legally and completely. What she felt was the exposure of it, the sudden visibility. She had built her life in Harlow Creek on the architecture of privacy, not secrecy. She had never lied to anyone here, but simply the absence of a public story. She was Elara Voss, the painting teacher. That was enough. That was all. A divorce filing made her into a character in someone else's narrative. The wife who left, the woman who ran, the Eastern lady living under her mother's name in a Wyoming town. It made her past into a thing that Harlow Creek would read about and have opinions about. And it made Cade's association with her visible in a way that it had not been before. She thought about that for a long time. He was a man of standing in this valley. His ranch, his name, his character, these were things he had built over 12 years of hard, honest work. She was about to become, publicly, a divorced woman. There were people in towns like Harlow Creek for whom that word was a door. That closed. People who would look at Cade differently for the association. She went to the ridge at the usual time that evening and told him about the letter. He read it, handed it back, looked at the valley for a moment. "Does he know about me?" he asked. "No. The lawyer's letter asks for my current address and circumstances. Nothing personal. But he'll find out. Eventually. Probably. And you're worried about what that means for me?" She looked at him. "I'm worried about what it means for you, yes." He was quiet for a moment. That particular quality of quiet she had come to recognize as thinking, not absence. "Elara," he said, "I need you to understand something about how I see this." She waited. "I have been alone in this valley for 12 years, he said. "Not unhappy, I want to be clear about that. My life has been what I made it, and I made it well, but alone." He turned to look at her fully. "I found something on this ridge 3 months ago that I did not expect to find and that I am not willing to give up because of what other people might decide to think about a piece of paper. It's not just a piece of paper. It will follow me. Then it follows you here, and I'm standing next to you when it does." She held his gaze. "You don't know what people will say." "No, and I don't particularly care." He said it without heat, the way he said most things, simply from a settled place. "I care what's true. What's true is that you're the most honest person I've ever met, and the best painter I've ever seen, and I have been standing on a cold ridge in Wyoming every evening for 3 months, because being near you is the most alive I've felt in longer than I can honestly name." He paused. "A divorce filing in Philadelphia doesn't change any of that." She looked away, looked at the valley going dark in the January cold, the creek a silver thread. Below them, the bighorns, white with snow. "I'm not easy," she said. "I know. I won't give up my painting. Not for anyone. I know that too. I have opinions that are inconvenient, and habits that are unusual, and I talk to the light when I see work, and I will never be the kind of woman who makes things comfortable and quiet. Elara." His voice was patient, faintly amused. "I know who you are. I have been paying attention." She looked back at him. "Write to the lawyer," he said. "Give him the address. Let it be filed. And then? And then come up the ridge tomorrow evening." He picked up her paint box and held it out to her. "And paint." She took the paint box, held it for a moment. "You're very certain for a man who's known me 3 months, she said. "I'm certain about the things that matter." He looked at her steadily. "I was certain about this land when I bought it. Didn't need more time than the time I needed." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "All right," she said. "If this story is doing what I think it's doing to you right now, you're going to want to watch this to the very end. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel exists for stories exactly like this one. Join us." She wrote to the lawyer the next morning, gave the Denton boarding house address, stated her circumstances plainly: employed, self-supporting, residing in Harlow Creek, Wyoming, and in agreement with the proceeding. She folded the letter, sealed it, and handed it to Adelaide to post, because Adelaide was going to the store. Adelaide took the letter without comment, squeezed Elara's hand once, briefly, and went to get her coat. The divorce was finalized in the spring. The papers arrived on a Tuesday in late April, and Elara sat with them at the east window for a long while, looking at the legal language that transformed her on paper back into a single woman, Elara, last name Voss, age 32, resident of Harlow Creek, Wyoming Territory. She felt, reading it, not the grief she had expected, and not the pure relief she'd hoped for, but something more complex. The weight of a door closing fully, finally, on a room she had not been able to fully leave until this moment. She allowed herself that afternoon to feel it completely. Then she went to the ridge. Cade was already there. He had not known the papers were arriving today. She had not told him to expect her, but he was there, sitting on the ground with his back against a boulder and his hat over his eyes. And the buckskin was cropping at the winter-dry grass at the ridge's edge, and the whole scene was so thoroughly, naturally itself, so unprepared, so unstaged, that something released in Elara's chest. He heard her coming and pushed the hat back. "Papers came," she said. He looked at her. "You all right?" "Yes." She set up her easel. "I think so." She loaded her brush. "Yes." He didn't say anything more. He watched the valley, and she painted the valley and the spring. Light was extraordinary thin and gold and fragile, the kind of light that came right at the edge of the season when the world was not quite sure of itself yet. She worked for an hour without speaking. When she set down the brush, she said, without turning, "Cade, I would like to stay." A pause. "Here on the ridge?" She looked back at him. "Here," she said, "in Harlow Creek, near you. I would like it to be a permanent arrangement." He got to his feet in that single easy movement, unhurried, crossed to where she stood. "I was going to ask you," he said, when it seemed right. "It seems right." "Does it?" She looked at him with all of it. The 2 years alone on this ridge, the East Room, the painting, sessions, the mornings with her coffee at the window, the evening he hadn't come, and the way. The absence had felt like a held breath. The portrait, the letter, him on the cold ridge inn. December saying, "I wouldn't make your life smaller." "It does," she said. He proposed there, on the ridge, at sunset without a ring at that moment he had not known. This was today. But he proposed with a directness and simplicity that was entirely characteristic. He told her what she meant to him in plain language, without performance, and asked if she would have him. She said yes before he finished the question. The ring came the following week, a thin gold band set with a small piece of Wyoming, turquoise, blue-green as the creek in summer, chosen by Cade from the jeweler in Casper with the same care he brought to everything. He put it on her finger on the ridge at the same hour, because it seemed right to complete it where it had started. "I want to paint this," she said, looking at her hand. "Then paint it," he said. They were married in May, at the Harlow Creek Church, on a morning when the sage was in bloom and the bighorns were still carrying snow on their peaks, and the sky was that thin, particular blue that felt like the world held its breath in the best way possible. Adelaide Denton stood with Elara. In the absence of any family, Elara had a mother in Boston who had been informed by letter and had not responded, which Elara received without drama and held her hand briefly before passing her forward. The church was full. Harlow Creek turned out in its entirety, because whatever the town had known or suspected or gossiped about over the winter, what they saw now was one of their own standing up for a woman who had given 3 years of careful, honest work to this valley, and they came to witness it, the way communities come to witness the things they have quietly been hoping for. Elara painted the wedding flowers the night before the ceremony because her hands needed to be busy, and because she had learned to trust what her hands knew. She moved into the embarrar after the wedding her paints, her canvases, her east-facing instincts, and the 2 boxes of brushes that Adelaide had helped her pack with the particular care of a woman sending off someone she loves. Cade had, without being asked, cleared the south-facing room off the main house and put large windows in the west wall. She stood in the doorway of that room on the first evening, her paint box in her hands, the Wyoming light coming through the new glass, and laying itself across the bare floorboards in long golden rectangles. She looked at it for a long time. "The light is good," she said. "I measured," he said. "Tracked the sun for a month. Figured out which wall." He stood behind her, not quite touching. "You can change anything that doesn't work." She turned around, looked at him. This man who had tracked the sun for a month. So the light would be right. She set down the paint box and kissed him, and it was nothing like the careful, negotiated kisses of her previous life. It was full and grateful and without reservation, and he held her. The way he held everything he valued, steady and sure, and without any performance of it. "Thank you," she said, when she could. "The floor might need a mat," he said. "Paint drips." She laughed, really laughed, the kind she had not done freely since she was a girl, and felt it fill the new room and the hallway beyond it, and probably drift out through the good west windows into the spring evening. "I'll get a mat," she said. Before we go further into the years they built together, hit the like button right now. If this story has you, it tells this channel that you want more of this, and it genuinely matters. Let's keep going. The Embar changed around Elara the way land changes around a river, not by force, but by coniments. The steady, patient insistence of something that belongs there. She kept her morning painting sessions, rising before dawn, to catch the early light in the creek. Pastures, the fog that sat in the low ground in certain seasons, the way the cattle moved through, it like slow ships. She painted the ranch hands Dix and Warren Hobbs, who regarded her initial presence with the watchful neutrality of men who have decided to reserve judgment, and who, over the course of the first summer, began occasionally asking to see the paintings, and then began stopping to look at them as a matter of course, and who eventually became, in their wholly unsentimental way, her most consistent audience. She painted Cade at work, at the fence line, in the saddle, working cattle in the sorting pen. He sat for her formally twice, and informally every day, and she understood by the end of the first year that she had not, on the ridge in those first months, captured everything that there were. New angles still to find, new light still to catch, and that this was not a problem but a gift. The ranch made sense to her in a way she had not anticipated. Not the business of it, the cattle and the market prices and the seasonal calculus of water and grass, though she learned that too, because she had always learned the places she inhabited. It was the physical logic of it. The way everything had a reason. The way Cade moved through it with the same quality of attention she brought to painting. Present, honest, uninterested in pretending that things were other than they were. They argued, occasionally, about the things that two people with strong characters argue about when they share a life. She forgot to eat when she was deep in a painting session. He understood this, but worried, and his worry expressed itself as a particular kind of standing in the studio doorway with a plate in his hand that she found both irritating and, privately, the most touching thing she had ever seen. He tracked mud through the room she worked in. She said, so. He was more careful, then less careful, then more careful again, which was the rhythm of it. Money was a consideration. The ranch was sound but not wealthy, and Elara's painting income, which had been modest in Philadelphia and had grown steadily since she'd begun working, with genuine freedom now needed to be factored into the household arithmetic in ways that required conversation. She was not accustomed to accounting for herself to anyone. He was not accustomed to a wife who had independent income and strong opinions about it. They worked through it with the honesty they brought to everything, directly, sometimes imperfectly, always, returning to the essential fact that they were on the same side. In the autumn of their first year of marriage, a letter arrived from Denver, a gallery not one she had approached, one that had apparently heard of her work through. The art dealer circuit that ran between the western towns and the eastern money wanted to know if she had work available for a group exhibition of western painters. The show was scheduled for February. They could offer her 3 wall panels, which was significant. She read the letter twice and handed it to Cade across the supper table without comment. He read it, looked up. "That's significant," he said. 3 panels. That's not a small show. No. He looked at her carefully. "What do you want to do?" "I want to go," she said. "I want to show 3 paintings, and I want to see if it opens any further. Doors, and I want you to come with me." He was quiet for a moment. "I can't leave the ranch in February. Calving season starts in March. February is possible." He looked at her, a beat. "You checked." "I checked things." He smiled that full, unheld smile she had still not entirely gotten used to. "All right," he said. "Who watches the ranch?" "Dix and Warren have done it before. You've left for week-long trips." "Denver's further than Casper." "Yes." He considered it. "What would you want to show?" She had already thought about this. "The Ridge series. The ones I've been doing since last." And she paused. "And the portrait." "My portrait. It's the best thing in the series. Possibly the best thing I've done since I got here." He looked at her for a long moment. "You want to show a painting of me in a Denver gallery?" "I want to show a painting of a Wyoming rancher at sunrise in a Denver gallery. The subject is incidental." "Is it?" "Cade." He laughed quietly. "Fine," he said. "Yes, we'll go." The Denver show opened on a Thursday evening in February 1880 in a gallery on Larimer Street that smelled of beeswax and new paint, and the particular excitement of a crowd of people who have come to be seen as much as to see. Elara wore her best dress, dark green, practical in its way, but with a quality to the fabric that registered correctly in rooms like this, and stood beside her 3 panels with the same calm she brought to the Ridge. The Ridge series stopped people. Not all people. Art never stops all people. But the ones who stopped in front of her panels stayed. And the conversations that began there were the kind she recognized, the particular quality of attention. That means a person is genuinely moved rather than performing being moved. The portrait stopped them longest. A collector from Chicago, a woman named Mrs. Hartfield, 60, wearing the assured quality of someone with genuine taste and sufficient money to follow it, stood in front of the portrait for nearly 10 minutes. Then she turned to Elara. "Who is he?" she asked. "My husband," Elara said. Mrs. Hartfield looked at the painting again, then at Elara. "You love him very much." "Yes. It shows." She looked back at the canvas. "That's not criticism. That's the highest possible compliment. The best portraits are love letters." She bought 2 paintings from the Ridge series, the largest ones, and gave Elara the name of a gallery in Chicago that she said would be interested. On the train home, crossing the winter plains in the dark, Elara sat with her head against Cade's shoulder and his arm around her shoulders and thought about Mrs. Hartfield's words. The best portraits are love letters. She turned the thought over, looked at it from different angles. The way she looked at compositions. "You're thinking very loudly," Cade said, without opening his eyes. Mrs. Hartfield said the portrait was a love letter. She's not wrong. I know. She watched the dark prairie pass outside the window. "I painted you before I admitted that I loved you. My hands knew before I did." He opened his eyes at that. Looked at her. "That's a significant thing to say." "I'm a significant person." She met his eyes. "I paint what's true." He pulled her closer, and she let herself be pulled. And outside the train window, the Wyoming Territory was cold and dark and vast, and entirely theirs. You have stayed with this story this long, which means you know what it is. Don't let the algorithm bury it. Like this video right now, subscribe if you haven't, and share it with someone who believes in love that doesn't ask you to be less. Now let's go to the end. The years that followed were marked, as good years usually are, not by single dramatic events, but by the accumulation of ordinary, extraordinary things. Elara's work found its audience steadily, the way rivers find the sea, not in a rush, but by the persistence of moving in the right direction. The Chicago Gallery Show in 1881 was followed by one in St. Louis in 1883. Her name entered the particular conversation that runs between people who care seriously about art, quietly, without the noise of celebrity, but durably. People who knew said she was painting the West the way it needed to be painted, honestly, without romanticism, without apology. She was home for every calving season and every roundup. She was home for the dinners she and Cade cooked together on Sunday evenings, which had become the kind of ritual that anchors a life without either of them having decided to make it one. She was home for the arguments about money and the compromises about time and the thousand small negotiations of two people who have decided that being together is worth the work of it. She was home on the March morning in 1882 when their daughter was born. The labor was long and hard, and Cade spent most of it on the porch in the cold because Adelaide, who had come out from town for the occasion, as a matter of course, the way she came out, for everything that mattered had told him firmly that he was not needed inside and was needed outside, specifically for the purpose of not being inside. He chopped more firewood than the ranch would need for a month. He wore a path in the porch boards. When Adelaide came to the door and told him he could come in, he crossed the bedroom in 3 strides and stopped at the bed's edge. Elara was exhausted. He could see that. The particular transparency of someone who has been through something large, but her eyes were clear, and she was holding a small wrapped person against her chest with the focused, careful quality she brought to things that required complete attention. She looked up when he came in. "Meet Margaret," she said. He had assumed she would name the baby without interference. She was Elara. She did not require permission, and he had been prepared to love whatever name she chose. But something happened when she said it, something quick and silent in his chest. "After your mother?" he asked. She looked down at the baby. "After the woman I wish my mother had been," she said quietly. "The name she should have had." A pause. "And after Adelaide." She looked up. Her middle name is Adelaide. I should have warned her. From the hallway, Adelaide's voice. "I heard that, and I approve." Margaret Elara Adelaide Merritt called Maggie from the first week because she had a look about her right from the start that was definitively a Maggie grew up on the MBR with paint in her hair and the outdoors in her bones and the particular self-possession of a child raised by 2 people who took her seriously. She had Cade's patience and Elara's eye, which was a combination that produced, by the time she was 6, drawings of horses and cattle that Elara pinned to the studio wall without hesitation, and that Cade studied with the same quiet attention he gave to everything he valued. The second child, a son, born in 1885, named James, had Elara's intensity and Cade's steadiness, which made him simultaneously easy to love and exhausting to parent, and which both of his parents found secretly delightful. James had no interest in painting, but had, by age 8, an opinion about every painting his mother made, delivered with a directness she could only applaud. "That shadow's wrong," he told her once, standing in the studio doorway with mud on his boots. "It's not wrong. It's expressive." "Looks wrong. Then don't look at it." "I'm looking at it." "James, the shadow's wrong." Cade, from the hallway. "The shadow might be slightly." "You're not helping," Elara said. He laughed. She heard him all the way to the kitchen. The ridge remained hers. There were seasons when she did not get there as often as she would have liked. A difficult calving year, a sick child, the inexorable pull of domestic life. But she always returned. The painting sessions on the ridge were the place she went to be completely only herself. And this had not changed with marriage or motherhood or the years that had softened some of her edges without changing the essential shape of her. She brought Maggie up the ridge for the first time when the girl was 4, set up the small easel she had made from scraps of wood, gave her a brush and 2 colors, blue and yellow, and stepped back. Maggie stood at the easel for a moment, looking at the valley below. "It's big," the girl said. "Yes. How do you paint something that big?" "You don't paint all of it. You find the part that's true, and you paint that." Maggie looked at the valley for another moment. Then she dipped her brush in the blue. Elara set up her own easel beside her daughter's and painted. They worked in companionable silence for 20 minutes, side by side, while the light changed above the bighorns and the sage went silver in the evening wind. When Cade came up the ridge to find them, he had brought their supper in a cloth, a thing he did occasionally. He stopped at the crest and looked at the two of them, the woman he had found here, and the daughter they had made, both at their easels, both painting the same sky in entirely different ways. He stood for a moment before they heard him. Elara looked back and saw his face, saw what was in it, the particular quality of a person, looking at something they understand to be more than they could have imagined, and smiled. "Come see," she said. He came and stood behind them and looked at both canvases. Elara's assured, complex, the light rendered with 20 years of practiced understanding, and Maggie's, which was 2 colors and a child's certain hand and something in it. Even so, that was unmistakably true. "She has your eye," he said quietly. "She has her own eye," Elara said. "That's better." He put his hand on her shoulder. She put her hand over his. Maggie kept painting, unconcerned, adding a streak of yellow that had no literal basis in the scene before her, and that was, Elara thought, exactly right. They came back to the ridge for 25 years more. In 1905, when Elara was 57 and Cade was 60, they climbed it for what they both understood without saying so might be one of the last easy climbs his knee had been. Troublesome since a bad year in the early 90s, and the ridge was steep, and they had both stopped pretending that the years were not doing what years do. They brought her easel. Anyway, she painted the sunset. He sat on the boulder she had been leaning against when they met, and she glanced at him occasionally across the rim of the canvas, and he looked at the valley, the way he had always looked at it, with the particular attention of a man who has known this land through all its seasons and has no patience for taking any of it for granted. "You remember what I said?" she asked. "The first evening. What you asked me. You told me you always painted alone. You asked if it seemed lonely." "I remember." "I said it seemed honest." "You did." She added a stroke to the canvas, looked at the painting, added another. "I was right," she said. "It was honest, but it wasn't complete." He looked at her. "The painting was honest," she said, "but something was missing from it. Something I couldn't paint alone, because it wasn't there yet." "What was it?" She looked at him across the ridge, this man, this particular patient, unperforming man who had tracked the sun for a month, so her studio light would be right, who had come up this ridge, night after night, because she was worth coming to. "Someone to see it," she said simply. He looked at the painting. Then, at her. "I see it," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what I mean." Below them, the creek caught the last of the light and held it for a moment, a silver thread, running through the dark sage, bright and brief and entirely itself. And then the sun dropped below the bighorns, and the color came, all at once, wild and impossible, and everything she had spent her whole life trying to catch. Her brush moved. He watched. The sky blazed. If this story gave you something, if it sat with you the way good things sit, then do one thing. Before you go, subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear that love when it's right. Doesn't ask you to disappear into it. It asks you to be more completely yourself. That's what this channel is for. Every story, every sunset. Thank you for watching.